So number 2 is asking about the deposit expansion multiplier. And in number 2 in the sheet, they tell us that our reserve ratio is 25%. Before we get into the math of what the deposit expansion multiplier is, otherwise known as the money multiplier, what we're going to make sure that we remember is that process of lent, spent, saved, lent, spent, saved. You see, money cycles through the economy, and it will keep going and going and going and going. I made the example, I withdraw $20,000 or borrow $20,000 so that I can pay for college for my children. I give that money to the school. The school then is going to either spend some of the money or they're going to save some of the money. Either way it goes, that money is going to get spent and lent again. If the school puts it in a bank, the bank's going to lend that money. That's the only way banks make money, is by lending money. And so if the school gave it directly cash to its employees, then they're going to spend it anyway, whether it's on Domino's Pizza or books or movies, and then it ends up in a bank yet again. So all drains lead to the ocean is the joke in Finding Nemo, right? In the world of money, all money paths lead to the bank. And then what does the bank do with the money? They lend it. And then people spend it. It cycles in the economy, and then it gets saved again. Lent, spent, saved. It makes its way back to the bank. It gets lent again. As soon as that money hits the bank, what is the bank going to do with it? They're going to lend it. They're going to lend it because it's the only way they make money. Banks make money off of interest from loans. It's the only way they make money. And so in the end, then, the banks want to loan that money as many times as they can. Now, we could sit here and count lent, spent, saved. What if it got lent, spent, saved 72 times? We'd have to do all the math and add all it up, right? That's tedious. We don't want to do that. So instead, we have what's called the money multiplier. The money multiplier, then, we can use to immediately jump to the maximum increase in the money that's going to happen. We use the money multiplier to find what's called the maximum change in the money supply. Now, it assumes that all the money is going to get lent, and all the money is going to get spent, and all the money is, it assumes everything gets spent. Grandma, if she takes that money and puts it in a shoebox and hides it in a drawer, that money gets pulled off of this equation, and that changes things. We always assume everything's getting lent, spent, saved. It just makes life way easier. Because there are people that will hold money in a vault. I mean, in Ozark, he kept the money in a pontoon boat, right? And so we want to make sure that we're aware that we're assuming all money gets lent, spent, saved for the multiplier to work. So the number 2 then says we have a reserve ratio of 25%. And so I'm just going to write that over here. The reserve ratio is 25%. If the reserve ratio is 25%, that means that to find the money multiplier, all you have to do is take the number 1 divided by the reserve ratio. That means then that 1 divided by 25%. Now, you know that you technically cannot do the math like this. You have to convert this to a decimal form. 1 divided by 25% equals 1 divided by 0.25. 1 divided by 0.25 is as easy as asking how many quarters in a dollar. And so 1 divided by 0.25 is 4. And so in this number 2 on the sheet we're working on, the money multiplier is 4. Now, what does that mean? That means that whatever the initial dollar amount that we're playing or pretending with. In my example, I was borrowing $20,000 to send my kids to college. If I'm borrowing $20,000 to send my kids to college, and the money multiplier is 4, what's the maximum change in money supply that can happen as a result of me borrowing $20,000? The answer is that we have to take the multiplier times the dollar amount that we started with, and what do you get? $80,000. And that's it. It's that easy in this scenario. $80,000. Remember, in economics, if the answer is easy, it's probably right. Remember, in economics, if you get some jacked up number in your math that you're doing, you better rewind and start over, because the math will always be easy on the AP test, because they don't want it to be a math test. They want it to be an econ test. Now, let's change the number 2 here a little bit. Let's say that the reserve ratio is 10%. Now, I'm going to ask the same question. If the reserve ratio is 10%, what is our multiplier? Well, that's 1 divided by 0.1 now, right? Like so, we just punch it in. This means how many dimes in the dollar? That's 10. So 1 divided by 0.1 is 10. This equals 10 then. And so in this scenario, if this were the reserve ratio, if I borrowed $20,000 and immediately spent it on college, how much additional money is going to be created in the economy? $200,000. And so the reserve ratio, you may remember me saying the Fed does not like changing it. The Fed doesn't like changing because it makes big changes to the overall money supply because it changes the multiplier significantly. And so the money multiplier and the process of using the money multiplier is our first step towards finishing this unit.